It started like any other quiet afternoon in our neighborhood: blue skies, birds chirping, and the usual HOA patrol doing their rounds like they're on some kind of secret mission. My wife had just come back from a run, wearing her usual gear, minding her own business. That's when one of the HOA cops, not even real police, stepped out of his little golf cart with a badge clipped to his vest and a taser in hand. Yeah, a taser. For what? Jogging too fast? Looking too confident? We still don't know. But what he really didn't know was who he was dealing with. See, my wife isn't just another homeowner on the block. She's former special forces, trained, calm under pressure. And what this guy also didn't realize is, her old team. They were already watching from a distance. Let's just say they don't miss much. What followed wasn't just overreach. It was straight-up chaos disguised as neighborhood safety. But here's the twist: my wife never even flinched. She knew how this would play out before it even began. And what happened next? That's when things really took a turn, because when the HOA tried to flex, they had no idea the people they were messing with weren't the ones to scare. Stick around. You're gonna want to hear what happened next. It all started a few weeks ago when the HOA decided to crack down on unapproved activities in the neighborhood. They sent out letters about parking violations, lawn care, and some bizarre rule about noise levels, like they were the neighborhood police. At first, it was easy to laugh off. But then the HOA started showing up unannounced, driving their little carts up and down the streets, acting like they owned the place. My wife wasn't the only one who felt like something was off. A lot of the neighbors started noticing how invasive they were getting, like they were trying to turn the community into a controlled zone. Some complained about them knocking on doors for minor infractions. Others started avoiding the patrols altogether. It was a strange vibe, and the whole thing just felt wrong. But here's the kicker: my wife had dealt with much worse than a bunch of overly ambitious HOA guards. Her years in special forces gave her a whole different perspective. She wasn't about to let some guy with a taser intimidate her, especially not for something so trivial. The tension in the air that day wasn't just from the HOA guy holding his weapon. It was from everything building up over the past few weeks. And just when you think things can't get any crazier, that's when I noticed something strange. There were more eyes on us than I realized, and those eyes weren't just watching, they were waiting. As the minutes ticked by, everything seemed to slow down. The HOA guy, still holding his taser, was standing a little too close for comfort. He had no idea what he'd just stepped into. I could see it in his eyes. He was trying to size up my wife, probably thinking she was just some civilian who wasn't going to put up a fight. But she wasn't just any civilian. And the more he postured, the more I could feel the tension rising, not just from us, but from everyone around us. From the corner of my eye, I saw the neighborhood cameras flicker on. It wasn't just the HOA watching anymore. A few neighbors had gathered on their porches, pretending to mind their own business, but watching every move. What they didn't know was that my wife's team was already in position, scattered throughout the area. It wasn't clear who was doing the watching. Was it the HOA, or was it my wife's old crew keeping an eye on them? The atmosphere was electric, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a taser or some petty rule enforcement anymore. There was something deeper happening here. The HOA guy might have been feeling brave, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He didn't know who he was up against. And that's when the strange part kicked in. He wasn't alone. A second man appeared out of nowhere, walking slowly up behind the first guy with a phone in his hand. Was he recording? Was he a backup? The air around us thickened as I realized this was no longer just an isolated incident. There was a much bigger game unfolding, and we were all just pieces on the board. The second guy, the one with the phone, was standing at an angle that made me uneasy. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he was positioned, like he knew exactly how to stay out of the line of sight, but still had the perfect vantage point to record everything. The camera zoomed in on my wife, and I saw her jaw tighten. She wasn't looking at the guy with the taser anymore. She was watching the one with the phone, calculating. I could feel the change in the air around us, like the calm before a storm. That's when the first guy, still holding the taser, stepped a little closer. He was talking, but his voice was low and strained, as though he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince her. "You're not above the rules, lady. We're just doing our job here." But his words were hollow. You could tell he was losing confidence. I glanced around. The neighbors were still there, some stepping closer, but none of them dared to intervene. They were just spectators, waiting for something to happen. The tension in the air was thick, almost too thick to breathe. And that's when it clicked for me. This wasn't just an HOA confrontation. It was a setup. These guys weren't just overstepping their boundaries, they were baiting us into something bigger. The cameras, the second man recording, they were making sure they had the perfect footage for whatever was coming next. My wife's eyes never left the guy with the phone. It was like she was in a whole different zone, her body still relaxed, but her mind calculating every possible outcome. But before I could even make sense of it all, something shifted. I heard a sound, footsteps behind us, and then the unmistakable click of a weapon being primed. My heart skipped. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. Someone else was involved, and that's when I realized this was about to explode. The sound of footsteps behind us grew louder, closer. At first, I thought it was another neighbor, maybe someone else who'd had enough of the HOA's power trip. But then, I heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some random bystander. This was something far worse. The second man with the phone hadn't just been recording. He was waiting for someone or something to tip the balance. My wife's reaction was instantaneous. Her body tensed, but her movements were still calm, deliberate, like she'd been here before. She didn't panic. She didn't even flinch. But I saw her hand subtly move towards her waistband, where I knew she kept her own weapon. She was ready, but I wasn't sure what for. Then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the rising tension. "Enough." It wasn't one of the HOA guards. It was a deep, commanding voice I didn't recognize. I turned, and standing there, in full tactical gear, was a third figure, someone who clearly wasn't part of the HOA. The newcomer was calm, but there was an edge to his tone, a sense of control that immediately shifted the entire dynamic. He looked at the two HOA guards like they were insects beneath his boot. "Drop the taser and step aside," he ordered. The HOA guy holding the taser hesitated, clearly confused and unsure of what was going on. The second man with the phone was already backing away, clearly out of his depth. But I knew something had changed. The stakes had just been raised to a whole new level, and now I was starting to understand. This wasn't some neighborhood dispute. This was something much bigger, and we were all caught in the middle of it. My wife's old team wasn't the only one in the shadows. Whoever this new guy was, he was playing a game none of us fully understood yet. The moment the man in tactical gear spoke, everything seemed to stop. The HOA guards stood frozen, looking between each other and the newcomer like they were trying to figure out who was in charge here. The air around us thickened, charged with the realization that this was no longer about neighborhood rules or petty power struggles. It was much bigger, much more dangerous. The man in tactical gear took a step forward, never breaking his cold, calculating gaze. I said, "Step aside," he repeated, his voice low but firm. This time, the HOA guard holding the taser dropped his weapon without question, his face pale, as if the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. The other guard, with the phone, backed up even further, his hands raised as if he had no idea what was going on. "I didn't expect you to be involved in this," the commander said, eyes locked on me with a knowing stare. But I suppose it was inevitable. The HOA had no idea what they were really dealing with, did they? I looked at my wife. She was still calm, still taking everything in. She didn't need to do anything, didn't need to say a word. This was her world, her people, and they were now all here. The tactical man's team had been in the shadows the entire time, watching, waiting. I had no doubt they had everything under control. But just when I thought things were going to settle, there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The man in tactical gear didn't even flinch as a second figure emerged from the shadows, someone I never expected to see. Standing in front of us, as if she'd been waiting for her moment, was my wife's former commander, someone I hadn't seen in years. She had the same calm, deadly aura as my wife, but there was something about the way she looked at me that sent a chill down my spine. My stomach dropped as I realized the full scope of what had just unfolded. This wasn't about enforcing neighborhood rules. This was a test. A test set up by my wife's old team to see if she was still capable of handling whatever came next. It was never about the HOA. It was about them seeing if my wife was ready to return to the field. Before I could even process what was happening, my wife stepped forward, eyes meeting the commander's with a look I hadn't seen in years. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. The commander gave a small nod, and I understood everything in that moment. The quiet neighborhood had just been the beginning. The real mission, it was only just starting. The commander's nod was the final piece of the puzzle. As the last of the tension drained from the air, everything clicked into place. My wife wasn't just some former soldier hiding out in a quiet neighborhood. She was being tested, pushed to see if she still had what it took. The HOA. They were nothing more than pawns in a much bigger game. And the man in tactical gear, well, he was just a reminder of how deep the reach of her old team really went. As the scene started to calm, the commander turned to the two HOA guards who had backed down. "You've seen enough," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. They didn't argue. They just turned and walked away, probably wondering what kind of world they had just stumbled into. My wife didn't look at them. Her focus was entirely on the commander. She had made her decision. I realized then that the neighborhood I thought I knew had always been a facade. There were secrets, hidden missions, people who lived quiet lives but were ready to leap into action at any moment. My wife's old team wasn't just a thing of the past. It was a force that was still alive, still capable, and still watching. As they all disappeared into the shadows, I was left with one thought: nothing here would ever be the same again. The quiet life I had imagined was over, and I couldn't help but wonder what kind of trouble was coming next.